Welcome, everybody, inside the coach's office. I'm your host, Dan Murphy, alongside my co host, Brian Barnes. And Brian, we got a great guest on tonight to help us discuss some of the biggest news of the week. Dusty May leaving the University of Michigan to take a job in the NBA with the Dallas Mavericks. Also, going to get into some Michigan football talk, which we're definitely excited to get into. Brian, we haven't talked about Michigan football in quite a bit. So, the way the Tigers have been, I'm ready to talk about something a little bit different than Tigers baseball right now. So, looking forward to talking some Michigan football as well as Michigan basketball. But before we bring on our guest, Brian, how you been? How was your week? I know you got a chance to get away this weekend. Where'd you go, and how'd it go?
Well, it was great. Yeah, my wife and I won a gift card at an auction to go have a night stay at the St. Clair Inn in St. Clair, Michigan. It's beautiful. Shout out to the people out there. And rushed back this morning to play my over 40, almost 50 old man baseball game today. And I'm proud to say I was 1 for 3 and didn't give up a run in my 1 innings pitch, but I'm definitely feeling it now. And it'll take me until probably Wednesday to recover. But I'm fired up to talk to you and talk to Anthony tonight about pretty interesting goings on this last few days in Michigan athletics.
Well, like I said, probably the biggest news of the week, Dusty May leaving the University of Michigan after just 2 years with the Michigan team and just a few months after the national championship. But we're thrilled to have this next guest on from the Wolverine.com and on 3. It's Anthony Broome. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I was looking forward to, let me back up. The day that this broke, myself and a colleague of mine, Clayton Safey, were set to golf in a U of M Club of Flint golf outing. And the news broke on the way that we don't get a lot of time to step out, play around a golf, and just kind of take in a day. It was a beautiful summer day out there in Grand Blanc, and wound up spending all of it in the clubhouse, not golfing and tackling the breaking news. So even when we think we're out of the woods with Michigan news, we never quite are.
Well, that kind of leads to my first question for you. When this news broke, were you as surprised as Brian and I were with him leaving and taking an NBA job, or were there some signs that maybe you saw kind of leading into this?
I am not surprised that Dusty May had aspirations to coach in the NBA. I think it was pretty apparent from really pretty early on at Michigan that this is one of those guys. They call them force multipliers. You bring them into your organization or your program, whatever it is, and they have a way of maximizing every single person, every single aspect of what they have around them. And he's that type of guy, and he's also an insatiable competitor. So at 49 years old, the decision to go to the NBA doesn't surprise me at all. I thought that was very much in the range of outcomes for his career. Now, did I expect it to be 2.5 months after they won a national title? No. Did I expect it to be, a little, the roster was set. Players showed up to prep for summer practices last week. He was set to run a youth camp in Ann Arbor last week. Did I expect any of this to go down the way it did last week? No, I didn't. I thought maybe with the roster that they've built that he might give this at least one more crack at Michigan, given the fact that, to me, at least on paper, knowing what we do now about who is on the roster, looks like they have a group that could get to Detroit next year to the Final Four, and maybe even compete to defend for their national championship that they will kind of celebrate in the summer here. So signs that he might be NBA bound at some point. Yeah. But there was, when I tell you that I was shocked with the rest of us Monday when we got the news, I mean, there was not even a breadcrumb, an inkling that this was a possibility that could have happened. But in hindsight, maybe it should have been.
Do you think it was more about the opportunity to coach Cooper Flagg in the situation in Dallas, or do you think it was more about, some of the things that we're hearing about, the frustrations with college athletics right now, which, I mean, I find to be ironic because, not to take anything away, obviously, what he did, but he built his roster with the way the current college athletics is set up, right? And it seemed like a great fit for the guy, and he developed those guys when they got here. And so to hear that, I was kind of flabbergasted a little bit. But what do you think it was more of? More so the opportunity in Dallas, or more so the frustrations with college athletics?
Yeah, obviously both things play into it. I do think if you were to hook him up to a polygraph and ask, okay, why are you no longer at Michigan? Why are you with the Dallas Mavericks? I think it boils down to simply the fact that probably, I don't know the specifics of what he's being paid, but probably being paid close to double what he was at Michigan and doing a third of the work. And I think any of us would probably jump for an opportunity like that. I do think it comes like I think it was just the perfect opportunity at the perfect time. You know, he leaves Michigan really without unfinished business. Like in 2 short years, he built a champion and climbed the mountaintop. And, you know, from there, the only thing that comes after it, and you can ask, I mean, again, this isn't a shot. It's just Tom Izzo won a championship and he's still waiting to win the second one. So just because you think you have a team that can get back doesn't necessarily mean that it's guaranteed. Now, it seems like you said, he thrived in the current era of college athletics, but I'll go back to this, and maybe this should have been more telling than we even put stock into it. But game concludes at Indianapolis, confetti's raining down on the floor, and we're interviewing coaches, interviewing players, and these coaches are looking around because transfer portal opened at midnight that night. Celebration was around 9:35 ish on the floor. So they're all celebrating with families and taking pictures and talking to media. And these guys are looking at their Apple Watches and, pointing like this, like, hey, portal's open at midnight. So to go from winning a championship immediately into you got to recruit your roster for next year, because if you don't put that work in right away, there is no confetti, raining confetti down upon you the following year. So I do think the fact that college basketball's calendar and the fact that even when you have deals with guys, there are agents involved and the price goes up and you're always on planes talking to donors, you're re-recruiting your own roster. I just think it's all this giant stew that when an opportunity like the Dallas Mavericks comes up, a lot of these guys, when they have to weigh jumping to the NBA, it's a rebuilding situation where you're kind of helming this thing from scratch or taking something else over. Dallas is a very young team. Cooper Flagg was the rookie of the year. You've got your ready-made superstar. They had a top 10 pick. It's an organization that, despite some controversy over the last couple of years with the Luka Doncic trade and all that, pretty stable organization that has competed and won at the highest level. So I think it's just all of it. And everyone looks for that one thing to pin it on. But I think it's just a stew of all of these things.
Where do you think this puts Michigan basketball now? Like, what kind of is the state of Michigan basketball? You lose your coach in late June, but you still have a great roster. You're coming off a national championship. How does this affect in terms of? I know they still have maybe a week and a half left of kids having the opportunity to transfer, and also future recruiting. Where do you kind of think this kind of puts Michigan basketball right now?
Well, that's the thing, is that because they've gone the interim route so far. Transfer portal for these guys does open, but will not open until July 24th. That'll open for 15 days after that. Now, if any point before then, they say that Mike Boynton Jr., who's currently the interim coach, is our head coach for next year, or they make some kind of declarative statement about who their next head coach is, then the portal will open 5 days after that. Now, there's been some good early returns with Elliot Cadeau is going to be back. Trey McKinney is going to be back. I think regardless whether Dusty May was here or not, that was kind of the battery of next year's team. So to have those guys, both 10 toes down and kind of setting a tone and trying to lead and keep guys around, that's a great start for them. But you go back to re-recruiting your entire roster again, which they had done 2.5 months ago. We don't know yet how much of Dusty May's staff will go with him to Dallas. I think it's going to be a decent amount of them. Now, the thing about Mike Boynton Jr. is that this isn't like you were handing the program off to Juwan Howard after John Beilein left, or like handing it over to Sharon Moore after Jim Harbaugh went to the NFL. Mike Boynton has been a coach for 7 years at the Power 4 level. They were mixed results down at Oklahoma State, but they dealt with a lot of sanctions, a lot of stuff that he had nothing to do with. NIL, I'm told, was a problem down there as well. So those are things where if Michigan's in about as good an interim situation as I think you can be in, because you have a guy who is Dusty May's top assistant. You have a guy who's had this head coaching experience, has worked under Brad Underwood, has worked under Dusty May now. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that he's a better coach now than he was 2 years ago after getting fired by Oklahoma State. So I think they're in stable hands, but in terms of what the outlook is and even things are just so year to year now. I mean, you're almost starting from zero from a recruiting standpoint with all the headway that you made with guys maybe for the 2027 class and beyond. So really the immediate question is what happens with this roster and how much of it do they retain? And it seems like they're going to retain most, if not all of it, but there are still some guys who are a little hurt and caught off guard by it and may weigh their options. We're just gonna have to wait and see.
I think you just answered my question about Mike Boynton because you just said he's going to bring stability, and to me that obviously was the most important thing in this situation, right? We're kind of close to the season. I mean, the summertime. I mean, yes, it's still later in the fall, but if Michigan were to go outside, like, were you hearing any other names, or was there anybody that they were seriously considering outside the Michigan family or current coaching staff that could have been the head coach, or do you think it was Mike Boynton all along?
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath, we had heard. I mean, everyone rushes to put together a hot board of candidates right off the bat. Billy Donovan, just because he's available, was a name that came up. But I don't think that's something Michigan has considered or seriously pursued. Josh Schertz down in St. Louis, who close friends with Dusty May. They run basically the exact same offensive system. A guy who had some Power 4 opportunities this past cycle and decided to stay at St. Louis. I guess that would be the one to quote unquote keep an eye on, but it just seems like right now Michigan is probably most content to let this play out for a year under Mike Boynton. And here's where it gets a little complicated is that let's just say Mike Boynton is your best shot at retaining the roster and having a good competitive season next year. And more than that, their expectations are to compete for and win national titles now. Your best shot at that is going to be keeping this roster together, and your best shot at keeping the roster together is Mike Boynton. But it's not hard to see a scenario where he comes out and this team has a great year under him, that let's say they make the second weekend of the tournament plus. I don't know what that looks like yet. I think Dusty May is a guy who is probably worth a couple spots in the Big Ten standings and maybe a round or two of a bump when it comes to the NCAA tournament. So it's just hard to know what the intangible loss of that is right now. But it's not hard for me to imagine Boynton going out and winning in this first year, getting the full-time job. And then it becomes, we'll see what happens from there. But there is no Band-Aid really you can apply to a situation like this. Like, I think it's going to be Boynton for this year. I think Boynton's probably going to do very well because I think he's more than competent. I think he might actually do a decent job, good enough to hold on to the job. And then a couple years down the road, you have to evaluate. But if this were a couple of years ago where transfer portal wasn't what it was, that might be more of a concern. But Dusty May showed, and Dusty May was a different guy. There are no other Dusty Mays out there. But 2 years ago, Michigan was 8-24, and now we're in an off season where that coach that took the job after that is in the NBA, and you're a defending national champion. So things accelerate much faster now than they used to.
You mentioned Dusty May came in here coming off an 8-24 season for Michigan. Just 2 years of an era for Dusty May, but it includes a national championship. Ultimately, how do you think long-term? We go 10, 15 years from now, how are fans going to look back at the Dusty May era? Because it's so interesting, right? Only 2 years, but it brought a national championship. How do you think fans are going to look at this era?
Yeah, I think you have to zoom out a bit first. Like, if you're a Michigan fan, when Juwan Howard was fired, you were a Wednesday night team at the Big Ten tournament, and you were gone as quickly as you got there. 8-24. It was a complete nightmare of a season. If you told anyone that in 2 years you'd be a national champion and that your coach would be gone after that, I think 100 out of 100 times you take that scenario. Now, given the way it's played out, I think I won't say he's polarizing, but there are definitely a lot of people in the Michigan fan base who feel like Dusty May kind of screwed them over, or that he agreed to come back, but then always had his eye on the NBA and all that. But I think a lot of it's going to depend on what happens next for Dusty May. Now, if he goes to the NBA and he's a Steve Kerr or Eric Spoelstra type of coach that you're in it pretty much every year, you're well respected. We know the churn of coaches in the NBA. Like, if he can find some solid footing there and stay in the NBA. Or maybe even, I guess it's within the range of outcomes, maybe he becomes like a Brad Stevens too, where if the coaching doesn't quite work out, maybe he kicks upstairs and becomes more of a front office type, because we've seen him thrive in that type of role at Michigan. But if he flames out with the Mavericks and then let's say 2 or 3 years from now, he goes back to college and he's at Kentucky or Indiana, that's going to kind of piss some Michigan fans off. And I would understand it. To me, I think you take the title. It's Michigan's first national title in almost 40 years. You tip your cap, you thank the guy, and thank goodness that you were able to have that type of guy. I think there are two outcomes for Dusty May. I think that scenario one that I brought up where he just sticks around in the NBA and is very successful is there. Or I could see him being like a Larry Brown type where every couple of years he bounces around, but he wins, but he bounces around just because that's how it goes. But I think he's a guy that, like I said, never satisfied. And maybe that was when we look back in hindsight. We had a press conference with him after the transfer portal closed, and he was just kind of ornery during it. You're coming off a national title. You just put together a great roster, and it didn't seem like he was really basking in that. And I just think that's kind of how he's wired. He's always been a guy that gets himself to the next thing, but it's clear that didn't satiate him. There was more for him to go out and chase. So we'll see what happens. I think he's going to be successful in the NBA, but who's to say? I mean, we all know how often these coaches in the NBA bounce around. And if he was to lose his job and he's still in his early 50s or whatever it is, there's probably not a job in basketball where someone wouldn't be interested in him.
Well, I wanted to switch gears now and get into some Michigan football. I mentioned, when we started, it's starting to get around that time. Brian and I haven't talked a lot about football. We've been, diving into the Tigers and getting into baseball and that, but we're starting to get closer to that time where it's football time. And wanted to get your thoughts on, Michigan transitioning now with Kyle Whittingham taking over after Sharon Moore was let go and fired and everything that transpired there. But Kyle Whittingham coming on from a long time coach at the University of Utah, had a ton of success there, but now steps in as the new head coach at the University of Michigan. What are some things that you have seen maybe throughout spring, throughout the summer, whether you've seen personally or just kind of read and heard, the biggest differences that he's kind of brought to the table since he's taken over as the head coach?
Yeah, I've been pretty careful to drag the old staff because I think a lot of those guys were put in a spot where coming off the Jim Harbaugh era, they just weren't qualified to hold a lot of those jobs by and large. Certainly the head coach on a number of fronts, but a lot of those assistants too. And you feel for those guys who they went 9-3 last year. A lot of places that gets you a promotion or gets you a raise, and at Michigan, it got everyone fired because of the head coach's conduct. But I think the biggest thing to me is, when Whittingham was hired, I felt like that was probably the safest sort of bridge option for them. Older guy, someone who's going to get you back on the right track, competent hire. I've been really impressed by the staff that he brought in. I mean, there are guys on his coaching staff, offensive, defensive lines specifically, that that's what Michigan's bread and butter is, and that's where they've always had their success. I think they're going to be much improved on both lines of scrimmage, which I think Kyle Whittingham, the second he walks into your program, inherently, that's something he's going to bring to the table. So the physicality, the running the football, that's all there. That's a perfect marriage. The thing that maybe has been the most refreshing is that structure is back. I used the word competency before, but it was kind of a boys' club down there the last couple of years. And Kyle Whittingham I still think he's a player's coach, but there's an accountability in that building that hasn't been there the last few years. And maybe to a certain extent wasn't there at times in the Jim Harbaugh era either. But, if you're 5 minutes early to a meeting, you're late. Or if you're not in by the time this air horn blows, you're late. The workouts in the weight room are a lot more structured, and guys made great gains in there. So I think it's something that was impressive to me was they were able to retain most of the roster. And I think a lot of those guys just wanted to be coached harder, wanted to be coached better. And I have a lot of questions about what will happen next under Kyle Whittingham. But if nothing else, I think you have a group of guys who, by and large, a lot of them got playing time last year. They were the youngest roster in the Big Ten. They found a way to win 9 games. It was kind of an empty calorie 9 wins, but a lot of those guys got experience, and now they're going to play for a much better coaching staff, albeit against a tougher schedule in year one. But I just think a return to what Michigan's kind of meat and potatoes are of winning the line of scrimmage. I think they're going to be a little more aggressive offensively and defensively, return to a system that is pretty similar to the one they ran when they were making college football playoffs a couple years ago.
You you mentioned how you felt that the structure is kind of back, and I don't know if you had a chance to go to any of the spring practices or not, but Dan and I have an official friend who had a chance to work some of the practices there, and he said pretty much the same thing word for word that you just said. He said it just felt different. Like it just felt like dudes weren't messing around and it was like it was go time. What to transition a little bit now, you mentioned a little bit more throwing the ball down the field and stuff like that. Schematically, how different, I mean, obviously when you have a new offensive staff, it's going to be different, right? How different do you think it'll look though, especially in the one position that I think is the most important position in all of sports, the quarterback? And a lot was put on Bryce Underwood, and, he was kind of the anointed one, and obviously the physical talents are there. And from a coaching perspective, no, I'm not a D1 guy, but looking at it, like to me, his ability, like he can run a little bit more. And Dan and I talk about this a lot. We kind of feel like he can still be a threat running the ball, and he does have a cannon. So like, yes, there are RPOs and things like that, but man, let that guy grip it and rip it, so to speak. What do you think schematically, or what have you heard, or what have you seen that might be a little bit different going into the next year?
Yeah, they're going to run the heck out of the football, and the quarterback's going to be part of it. Now, I don't think they're going to run him the way that they ran Devin Dampier at Utah last year. I don't think he's got 1,000 yards in him or anything. But last year's staff under Sharon Moore and Chip Lindsey, they kind of put him on training wheels, and there was this. It seemed like there was a kind of a push pull between head coach and OC. Like, how do we want to coach this guy? And I thought that push pull, that uncertainty, showed itself on the field too, with the way the results were week to week. I think, and I know there have been concerns about Underwood after a spring practice that was largely up and down, a spring game that was really rough. I mean, there's no putting lipstick on that. It was bad, but this is a hard reset of him, and almost kind of like his freshman year 2.0, in that, Jason Beck comes in, they're rebooting it from top to bottom, from his footwork on up. And I think they're not going to be averse to running him, because there was so much meat left on the bone in that area last year. I know they're going to want to take some more shots down the field. That's why you add a guy like a JJ Buchanan out of the transfer portal, kind of that jump ball receiver that they really haven't had in a few years, really since Nico Collins was there. And I'm not making a one-to-one comparison. Just haven't had that body type and that skill set. So you got a couple guys in that room who can stretch the field now. Andrew Marsh. I mean, those two, he and Bryce Underwood, are tied at the hip, and their chemistry is off the charts still. So I think the biggest change is going to be the improvisational license that Underwood has, but he's got to read it better too. That was he's wearing a non-contact jersey in a spring game, and he's bailing out of pockets where there's not even pressure applied yet. So slowing him down is a huge key. I think that, at the end of the day, though, when you look at how that Utah offense ran last year, because this is basically a continuation of that system. Jason Beck came to Utah last year from New Mexico. It's going to be like a power spread offense. But to my knowledge, there were only two teams that ran the ball better than Utah did last year, and they were service academies, Air Force and Navy, or Air Force and Army. One of those two in there were the only ones ahead of them. So I think when you look at a box score, it's going to look pretty similar, but I do think you will see a little more conviction and creativity with what they try to do.
Really quick, how do you think the fans took the Eric Weddle comments about Bryce Underwood? Did you think the majority of them agreed with them, or did they say, hey man, no, what are you doing? Like, that's an 19-year-old kid still, he's developing, like, that's not fair. How do you think most fans took it? And then how did you take it?
Most fans didn't take it well. I saw it to me, it's just another opinion. The way that he sort of spoke is maybe, I don't know, it seemed a little strange, like he had a bit of an agenda with it. But by and large, like what you see, there were practices during the spring where Tommy Carr was the better quarterback. Like, that is a fact. And it's probably one of those practices that Eric Weddle was at. We had heard that Bryce Underwood still had issues with turnovers and, not being able to take velocity off of some of his throws, but there were practices where he looked every bit the guy that they hoped he would. So I trust the staff coming in with fresh eyes. And, I'm sure there were people in the collective or some people at Michigan in his ear about, hey, like, we want to keep this guy happy now. We want to keep him around. But, I feel like if they had seen something that would suggest that he doesn't have it, you probably would have, like, I think they would be fairly honest about that. But again, I'm still getting a feel for, what's coach speak and what's not with this staff. But yeah, I mean, there are some people like Eric Weddle's not the only person I've heard that from, but there are also people I've heard that said, man, Bryce really looked like the guy that they thought he would be. So the simple question is that, how much stock do you put into practices in March when the season is, over 6 months away after that? So we're getting a little closer now. We're inside of 10 weeks until the season comes, and I think probably 6 or 7 weeks until fall camp starts. But that's when we're going to find out. No, they have their work cut out for them in getting him back on track, but he also won't turn 19 years old until just before the season starts. So I'm with people who are concerned. I just look at the other side of it as just because you saw bad doesn't mean that, the book is finished on him. I think there's a lot still to be discovered and figured out with Bryce Underwood.
You mentioned the trenches and how that's kind of been a staple of Kyle Whittingham teams at Utah. Where do you kind of see Michigan, both offensive and defensive lines right now? We know that was, speaking of a staple, that's been Michigan football forever, but especially in those Big Ten championship teams and that national championship team in 2023. They were dominant on both sides of the ball, offensive line, defensive line. Where do you think things stand right now as far as the starting and in depth, both on the offense and defensive lines?
Yeah, one of the silver linings from last year is that you got to play 3 redshirt freshman eligible guys and Blake Frazier and Jake Warner and Andrew Sprague, who now have starting experience. They're going to come into this year playing for a guy in Jim Harding, who just coached a pair of first-round picks at Utah in Spencer Fano, Caleb Lomo. So I trust the coaching there. Those guys will take a step forward. We've been told that pass blocking is an area that they still need to improve in, and maybe that's where that ties into the Bryce Underwood thing. Maybe if he can trust his pass protection just a little bit more, maybe we don't see those happy feet. But I think the offensive line is in very good hands. I mean, probably as good an offensive line coach hire as they could have made. I mean, that was a blow to Utah, losing Jim Harding to Michigan. So I'm very high on what they'll bring to the table. The defensive line right now, they've got a lot of guys. I think they've got more depth than they thought they would have. But John Henry Daly is a huge X factor for them because he comes over from Utah. He had 11.5 sacks last year. He was an All-American, 17.5 tackles for loss. Can he be, I'm not asking him to be Aiden Hutchinson, but can he be a guy that demands attention, that opens things up for other guys? Because, Aiden could fight through double and triple teams in college. Probably, obviously, a little bit better than when he gets that attention in the NFL. But that also opens opportunities for guys on the other side too. Lost in that Aiden Hutchinson season was that David Ojabo had, I think, 10.5 or 11 sacks that year. So, we're just looking for guys. You're looking for guys to step up and step into bigger roles. There have been some guys behind the scenes, like a Dom Nichols, like a Trey Pierce. They've changed their bodies. They have the chance to be, all Big Ten type of players. But I think that John Henry Daly, how he comes back from an Achilles injury that ended his season last year, that's going to determine a lot about their defensive front. And that front is important because I think that second level, the linebackers, would probably be my biggest question with them.
You brought up quite a few names already, but who are some names that you've seen throughout spring and the summer that maybe Michigan fans should pay attention to, whether it be some incoming freshmen that turn heads or some guys that maybe are going to step up that maybe were second and third in the depth chart a year ago who are going to step up into big roles?
Yeah, I'll start on offense. Jordan Marshall is a known commodity. I think a guy we know can tote the rock and be an RB1 for a team. Savion Hyder came in as a freshman, a 5-star recruit, and has every bit looked the part and then some. I think he's going to be a weapon catching the ball in the backfield. You could see those two guys on the field together at once. I think that he is not your typical freshman running back. I think that he will will have a big freshman season for them. Another freshman, Celeste Moa at wide receiver. I talked about they have a few more guys in there who can kind of stretch the field and have great speed. He's one of them. I think that if the season started today, he might be their starting or their third receiver behind Marsh and Buchanan. Defensive line, I'm interested in seeing what a 5-star for these guys are all freshmen. So that's crazy to think about. They could have that type of infusion of talent, but Carter Meadows is a 5-star recruit coming in, built like a small forward, a lot of explosiveness off the edge. I think he could find his way into a role in year one. And then on the back end, I think their secondary might be the strength of their team, regardless of position. Rod Moore's coming back for his 6th season, and he seems as healthy as he's been. So that's great news for them. You've got a couple young pieces back there, Shamari Earls and Jordan Young, who might not start, but will certainly be in the mix for playing time. Will have an impact, and probably a year or so down the road, we'll be talking about them as all Big Ten caliber players as well. So those are the few that pop out. I mean, there are a lot of guys on this team that I could see, like, because it's a fresh start for everyone and a new staff. I mean, there are a number of guys who stand out as sort of unmined gems or diamonds in the rough, whatever you want to call them. But there's a lot of talent here, and if more of these guys reach their potential than maybe some of us are expecting, then this could be a playoff roster. But I'm not ready to go there just yet.
So then, besides the obvious, then, right, your Ohio State, your Indiana, your Oregon, and then your non-league game against Oklahoma. Is there a game on the schedule that Michigan fans maybe not should be worried about, but should definitely pay attention to?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. Iowa is always going to be a program that tests your physicality. Actually, a road game at Minnesota might be sneaky tough for them, just because that's another team that's usually stout up front on both sides of the ball. They've got 2 really good edge rushers. Quarterback Drake Lindsay is a guy who could put some stress on a defense. So that could be a spot to look for. Penn State under Matt Campbell is just basically Iowa State's roster from last year with a few wrinkles thrown in there. So that'll be a tough game at home. UCLA is sandwiched in there between the trip to Oregon and the trip to Ohio State. And Bob Chesney is a guy that I like a lot. He comes from James Madison, the same kind of path that Kurt Signetti took. They added some interesting pieces in the transfer portal, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of a trap game for them as well. So it's a very difficult schedule, and there's a few spots where you might be given tougher games than you expect.
You mentioned that maybe you don't quite feel quite ready to say this is a playoff caliber roster, but this team coming off a 9-3 season last year with as much chaos as was going on with Sherrone Moore and everything that went on there. Obviously, there was a lot of talent. What do you think the ceiling is for this team this year?
I mean, from a record perspective, I don't think it's outside of the range of possibilities that they find a way to beat Indiana at home. Let me start with this. I'm picking them to go 9-3. We put out our football preview magazine. I put a stamp on 9-3, with those losses being to Indiana, Oregon, Ohio State. But if you find a way to get off to a good start and then you win that Indiana game, all of a sudden you go into November with college football playoff and Big Ten championship aspirations. And, it's an Ohio State team that Michigan has had some success with in the past. I mean, Kyle Whittingham, I think, brings a recipe with him that should set up for success, similar to the last couple of years, or the few years that Michigan really extended a winning streak in that rivalry. I mean, I'll say this, like, there's 11-1 might be somewhere in their bag. I'm not picking that to happen, but
what would have to go right then if they were to win 11 games? Like, what do you think then? Besides the obvious Bryce Underwood, what else would have to go right then for them to get to 11 wins, you think?
Your offense and defensive lines are what we expect Michigan offensive and defensive lines to be. You have a secondary that can disguise coverages, and that's given. I mean, that this schedule is full of really good quarterbacks, so they're going to be tested a lot. Like I said, I feel like they're on both sides of the ball, probably a year away from being like a 10-11 win team. But that's, like I said, I mean, it's going to take Bryce Underwood is obviously maybe the biggest factor in this, but it's going to take beating Indiana at home, and it's going to take maybe even going out west and beating Oregon. That's the one thing too, is that Michigan hasn't won on the West Coast since I think is either 88 or 89. They beat a bad UCLA team out there. But in the last couple of years, we've seen Oregon, Ohio State, and Indiana cross coast, whether East Coast to West Coast or Oregon coming out here and winning big games on the road. If Michigan's going to be a 10 or 11 win team, they're going to have to win one of those two really big road games, I think, to make it happen. And I'm just not ready to do that yet.
Final question we got for you, Anthony. We actually got a comment from another host on our network, actually my brother Tom. And basically summarized, he was curious about, for you as a journalist, as a podcaster, as a writer for a long time, covering college sports, how have things changed for you in how you cover college athletes now that, a transfer portal, but especially NIL? Some of these kids are multi-millionaires now. Has the change in college athletics, how has that kind of changed for you? And has it kind of changed, I don't know, the enjoyment level of covering college athletics?
I mean, it's definitely affected it. I've now covered 2 national championship teams where weeks or months after it happened, everything is completely thrown into chaos. So like the sustainability of it has changed. Not at a lot of places, but at Michigan for a number of reasons. I don't think players making money has changed how I cover them, because they should have always been making money, if we're being honest, at least how I feel about it. There's still people that deserve to be treated with dignity. I think people lose that when you attach a dollar amount to someone. But I also think that there's a little less patience now with everyone involved. Like, I get why people are critical of Bryce Underwood. Like, Michigan made a huge investment, hasn't paid off yet, but really, should we be surprised it hasn't paid off, given that it was a true freshman season? Is that the best allocation of your money now, given that you can just go to the portal and get a guy for $4 or $5 million for a year and just keep cycling it out year in and year out? Kurt Cignetti has found a way to do that. For me, it's just, I think everyone gets a little less grace now, and rightfully so, because like I said before, for everyone that might lament what a bad season looks like, you could flip things in a year. We've seen it in college basketball. We've seen it in college football. But also at the same time, like, what good football, good basketball, or a well-oiled machine looks like. And that's for me the biggest thing, is just, there is no, I'm not going to say, oh, wait till next year or wait a couple years down the road to see what Kyle Whittingham does. He's brought to Michigan to win now. And he came to Michigan to win now, because for as much as I think he might be able to coach another 8 to 10 years, because he's, a jacked, muscly grandpa. If he doesn't win, Michigan's going to be looking for another head coach a couple years from now. And it's as simple as that to me. So I don't know. I'll just say the differences with the newness of how college sports operates. Got to remember the last couple of years covering Michigan, I've also gotten way too up to speed on the NCAA rule book and some of the other stuff that doesn't have to do with the on-field product. So that's been a little bit exhausting, but by and large, it hasn't changed my coverage a ton, just because, I cover Michigan, and Michigan teams expect to win. When they don't, they fall short of their own standard. Well, I'm always going to be critical of that. So that's a long-winded way of saying not a whole lot has changed for me.
I feel bad for you, or anybody who's like, I can just see it now, right? You're having a press conference after a game talking to Bryce Underwood. You just said he's about to turn 19 years old, and he gets a difficult question that, man, like you may have seen asked to Jared Goff one day, right? It's just where you're right. We're to that point because of the grace part, like, and the expectations are what they are. And in a way, I do feel bad for the athletes to a degree, but again, they have a lot more money and that sort of thing. But I feel bad for you and your profession as well, because you're obviously balancing that, right? You want to be professional.
Don't feel bad for me. Like, I'm very happy with what I do, and we make pretty decent money doing what we're doing. But yeah, it's the one thing I'll say about the college athletes and what we can ask them and what we can expect of them is that I do think today's not just athlete, but today's young person is a lot more mature than maybe we all were growing up because of the internet, because of exposure to all of these things. I mean, now you got guys talking NIL in high school, and a guy like Bryce Underwood is just kind of been built in a lab since he was in middle school. It feels like, to be kind of the guy he is today. So because of how much of an industry it's become just across the board, and what these guys are taking on at a younger and younger age, like, yeah, there is less grace there, because these are college students, but they're young men now, and this is a job for them more than anything else. So it's as long as they're open to it, I mean, we're gonna throw it out there.
Well, Anthony, we really appreciate you taking the time, come on and talk to us, give your insight on Michigan basketball and Michigan football. Where can everybody find your work, and where can they find you on social media?
Yeah, we can find me at thewolverine.com. Also at thewolverineondemand.com. I brought show and tell with the class. We do an addition to the website. We do just put out a national championship book that you can thewolverineondemand.com. Our football preview will be shipping out probably sometime this week. So we do a monthly magazine as well. So we keep plenty busy in the off season, in season, all of it. So you can check that out. We've got one of the larger college sports message boards, a lot of great intel over at our website at thewolverine.com. So there's always logs being thrown on the fire, so to speak. So we keep busy, and I'm also on social media at Anthony T. Broome.
Awesome. Well, again, Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate the time. We look forward to maybe talking to you again down the road when we get a little closer to the season.
Yeah, would love to. Thanks for having me, fellas.
Awesome.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
All right, there he is, Brian.
That's a really good insight right there, coming from
Michigan
somebody.
basketball, and man, it is nice to talk some Michigan football, because we are getting close. We are getting close to that time.
Well, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have the meetings in Indianapolis, or in the coaching day. Yeah, those, I look forward to those. Those are a lot of fun as well. So, yeah.
But before we can really dive into to the NFL and college football, we still got these Tigers, man. Oh my goodness! And after the sweep of the White Sox last week and winning the first game of the Yankee series, had won 4 in a row, starting to feel maybe like things were going to turn around a little bit. I know you were still like, I'm still in the wait and see, but I was starting to get a little bit excited, at least like. It's to the point where I'm living and dying with every pitch again,
Yeah.
And then sure enough, we lose 5 out of the next 6 and finish this homestand 5-5, a 10-game homestand where you felt like really they needed to go at least 7-3 to kind of get something going. At worst, 6-4, and they end up splitting the series, going 5-5, gaining no ground in terms of trying to get back to 500. Really gained no ground ultimately in the division or in the wild card race, and just clicked more days off that ever clicking clock towards the trade deadline. Brian, I don't know. I know in our group chat, with Brian Steffen that we have, where we kind of vent about the Tigers. I know all 3 of us kind of felt like this might have been the nails in the coffin here this weekend.
Yeah. Well, if you've listened to me at all for the last month, I thought it was a couple weeks ago. Like I did, right? This just was a reminder of why I believe what I believe, right? Like I made the comment. I said, they lost 2 or 3 to this Yankee team, without Judge and Stanton. Like, I'm sorry, they're a step below. Like, even if hey, the American League's bad, get in the playoffs, anything can happen. Nothing's gonna happen. Like, Fromber isn't pitching at like he was last year, and we don't know if Skubal is going to be 100% healthy. He just doesn't look that yet, right? And so, this is just confirmation to me. Just everything, blown leads, not getting the big hit, relying on guys that had career years a year ago that just aren't doing it again this year. And it's good. It's good. And now, of course, ironically, like, watch them go sweep the Yankees the next 3 nights in New York, but. I'm sitting there watching this, thinking to myself, like, God, like this is all false hope if they win today. And I felt that way yesterday. I mean, back to 14 under 500, like it is. I mean, guys, it's there's no indication. I know everybody says no, it's they can do it. They're close. They're only this. No, there has been zero indication, of them going on an 8-game winning a long run. Zero.
The only thing
Oh,
that is
stop.
there, I'm not saying, no, I'm done. I'm done. I
Stop.
closed the casket this
God.
weekend. I'm done. But what I'm saying is the only thing that was there that kind of left the door open a little bit for me was how good the starting rotation has been, and it's continued to be.
But
the hitting, the anti-clutch hitting, you know, I want to get into that in a minute because that's been a theme of our show going back to last year, and we'll get into that. But you know, the bullpen has just destroyed this team all season long. They have blown so many games after the 7th inning. And we went back, we talked about the stat, you know, weeks ago where they had more, I think it was like 5 more blown games after the 7th inning than the second most team in baseball. I mean, it's incredible how many games this team has blown. And we could talk about the injuries, we could talk about the hitting, even the starting pitching at times earlier in the year, but this bullpen, more than anything else, I think, is the reason this team is as bad as it is this year.
Yeah. Well, starting pitching keeps you in games. It gives you an opportunity, right? It just doesn't guarantee anything. It just keeps you in the game for a long stretches of time. But, you know, one thing I thought of today watching the game was last year the Tigers won a lot of these type games that were low scoring, you know, got to make a play here and there. They were coming through and making wins like that. And so this year they've been in a lot of those 1-run, 2-run games, and they're not coming out on top. But sometimes I wonder with not just the roster construction, but like maybe their overall philosophy. And I guess to use a football comparison, you can't immediately in the middle of the season go from a spread to a wing T or power offense, right? But I sometimes do wonder, like, okay, like what do we talk about Cleveland? They play great small ball. They move the runner over, right? They play good defense. I'm surprised the Tigers, with all their struggles, haven't been more of that philosophy instead of just waiting for guys to get out of their slump. Do you know what I'm saying?
So I'll bring up an example too. I was there Thursday night. The game they lost 2-1, and Troy Melton was pitching a perfect game into the 6th inning. And there was a situation, I forget exactly what inning, might have been the 7th or 8th inning, where the Tigers were down 1-0. And McGonigal was on first, Kerry Carpenter was up. And I'm thinking, and it got to a 2-0 count. I'm thinking, hit and run. Try to manufacture something. Try to get something going here. You know, and they just didn't do it, and they ended up not scoring in that inning. And I'm just wondering, man, why? Man, situations like that, sometimes you got to take a shot. And yeah, maybe it's a risk. Maybe Kerry Carpenter hits a line drive, it gets caught, and you get doubled off. You know, those are the breaks sometimes. But when you're in the situation where it's a now or never, sometimes you got to push the envelope a little bit, man. You got to try to force something to happen, make something to happen, be aggressive, force the other team to have to make a play. And they just don't do anything like that, man. They cannot manufacture a run. And then sure enough, later in the game, the Astros, I think it was the top of the 9th inning, and they had a guy on first. They got a leadoff single. He steals. He gets to second. So still no outs, right? You got a guy on second. They get a sacrifice, a ground out sacrifice to second base, moves him over to third. You get a fly out sacrifice that brings him home. All that happened in that inning in terms of production was a single, but you got a steal, and then you got 2 sacrifices. They pushed the issue. The Astros pushed the issue with getting that steal. And then those other players came up and did what they needed to do and got sacrifices to move the runner over. Well, how often do you ever see the Tigers do that?
No,
I mean, almost never. It's so rare.
Well, and in their defense, like what did they get credit for the last couple of years is their ability to go from first to third, right? Pretty cool stuff. Well, in their defense, they just haven't had a lot of those opportunities.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying? Or they do, and they get the go sign rounding third, and he's out by 5 feet at the plate like that. You know, I can't remember who was running the other night, but that happened as well. So, you know,
they're aggressive in maybe some of the wrong spots. And then, you know, at times where you kind of wish they were maybe a little bit more aggressive in terms of trying to steal and hit and runs and things like that. Maybe they don't do it quite as much.
Do you think like AJ Hinch and Scott Harris and all those guys, like they've all been in the game for a long time, and the players, like, do you think they know? And I think they've known for like the last few weeks, like they know. Like, they're not stupid. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like we talked about the 08 season when the Tigers started 0-6 or whatever. Maybe not. I can't remember what it was, right? But, like, they were done. Like, you knew right then they were done. Do you think they know? Because I do.
I think they know now. I think they're the Walking Dead going into New York. I do. I'd be shocked if they – I'd absolutely shocked if they won this series. I'm expecting a sweep, and it's going to be over.
Yeah, I just want to see guys pitch well to add to their trade value. Like Jack Flaherty today, the best thing that came out of today is he had 9 strikeouts and threw 5 shutout innings.
Yeah, he's tradable now. He wasn't tradable 2-3 weeks ago. He's tradable.
More important than the win was him having that outing. I know it sounds awful, but
that's where they're at now. That's where they're at. You want to see the free agents to do well so that they can be traded. And then once those guys are traded, you want to see the younger players get solidified positions, which another thing I want to get into, but get solidified positions and then play those positions continually day after day throughout the end of the season. So we go into next season and these guys are ready to go. And you feel good about some of these guys going into next season and in some of their positions. Like they got some promising guys who are starting to show some things. I mean, Hao-Yu Lee looks like he could be a player. Malgiri's kind of interesting to see if he can develop the rest of this season. He's bringing some things to the table, and obviously McGonigal and Dingler and those guys, those young guys. And there's guys that are going to come up. Max Anderson's got to come up at some point after these guys get dumped. Eventually Max Clark's going to come up. Yeah. This guy it's going to be a couple years away, but we're seeing Bryce Rayner start to really show up these last couple of weeks too. So there's still promise for the future.
And listen, like Max Anderson has been raking lately. Like I guess he had his second 5-hit game of the year the other day and homer twice in a game. But I did think about this when people all year say, "Hey, why not give this guy a shot? What's it? How much worse can it get? Whoever it is, Max Clark, whatever." Okay, back to Michigan football really quick. Well, their first playoff team, who was their starting quarterback? It was Cade McNamara. Yeah. And J.J. McCarthy was on the roster, right? And then the next season, he was physically and mentally ready to assume that role. So a lot of times we got to remind ourselves that, like, man, that's still a kid who's mentally and physically just might not be ready to take on the day in, day out.
Okay, you want to bring up that scenario. What if Michigan was 9-2? And 2 of those losses were really on Cade McNamara, or maybe say like 5-2, and 2 losses were on Cade McNamara. Do you think J.J. McCarthy steps in as the starter?
No, I don't.
You still don't think he stepped as a starter?
No. I think he's
because that's more what the situation with the Tigers were in. They had one of the worst months in all of Tigers franchise history, and they weren't bringing guys up.
If he doesn't put the ball on the ground, Michigan's undefeated that year when they go, and they might be the number 1 seed in the playoffs that year against Michigan State. Do you remember he put in the game we were at?
We were there. I know.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know. It's a good question though. I mean, that is an interesting scenario.
Because I still go back to that month, the month of May, one of the worst months of baseball in Tigers history, and they just kept trotting the same guys out. Yeah. Day after day after day after day, kept doing the same things over and over again, pinch hitting Jahmai Jones, all of that. We've been through it over and over again, but that ruined their season. That ended the season. Yeah. Like you take away May, they're an above 500 team or right around 500 team. That month was so atrocious for so long, and they refused to make any moves.
No, but let me give you this scenario from a coaching high school athletics perspective, right? You have a junior varsity, 9th and 10th graders who are a pretty good group. Okay, and you go through a football season. It's like, all right, there's a theory that like, all right, let's keep those guys together for the entire season, their freshman and sophomore years, so they get that experience winning and having success and progress naturally. So when they get to varsity, they're 100% ready. Because there's no guarantees that those guys you just mentioned or any of the guys that we just mentioned that get brought up have success. And then you're going to send them back down and you're back to square one again, still with their development, right? So that's the thing. Like, I think I get it. I just don't think they had a lot of options. I don't think they had a lot of ready-made guys. Like, I think going back to it, Parker Meadows and Javi Baez, like their injuries, critical. Wenzel Perez not playing well, like critical, and Veerley not all critical to what was happening in May. I think that's a huge part of it, and you can't deny that.
Yeah, the Baez and Meadows injuries.
That still doesn't. But Dan, that still doesn't. What's the word I'm looking for? You can't downplay how bad your former number 1 pick Spencer Torkelson has been.
Yeah,
I mean, he had 2 hits today. But guess what? Like, I remember Tony Clark like having fantastic numbers at the end of the year. Well, guess what? He was like Pat Caputo used to always talk about that. Yeah, he's playing really well when they're 15 games out of first place and there's no pressure on him, and he can hit that way, and there's no those pressure at bats are out there.
That Torkelson 2-run home run when they're down 4.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what he does.
Yes,
it's what he does.
Like,
if the bases were loaded in that
Zilch.
situation, and you needed a home run to tie the game, he's striking out. 100%. I mean, you could bet your life on it. He's striking out in that situation. Riley Green, bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, bases loaded. They just need a base hit. Anything, just a little blooper, and they win the game. And Hader had just walked the bases loaded. He's having trouble throwing strikes. 4-pitch strikeout, swinging at balls out of the zone.
Yeah,
it's just. I mean, we commended Riley Green for his aggressive approach throughout the season. He's been tremendously better in terms of just being an all-around better baseball player this year.
No doubt.
But still, when it comes to clutch at bats, Riley Green, Torkelson, the worst. Yeah. Riley Green though is second in terms of just clutch at bats. These guys do not come through, and it's not just some small track record. It's not a small sample size. We've seen it for years now. It's who these guys are. They are not clutch, big time, big moment players. They're just not.
See if you read my mind when I saw Torkelson pinch hit late in the game and he got a hit. My immediate thought was, oh, do you know who next year could be our right-handed pitch hitter instead of Jahmai Jones? It could be Spencer Torkelson. Maybe that's his role. Like what? Like he's past the point. I'm sorry. Like
he's done. I'm to the point of DFAing him.
Yeah,
I am to that because you're not getting anything. You're not getting out of him. You get the occasional home run.
Correct. You get to that point typically as a 26, 27, 28-year-old where it's like you are who you are.
Yeah.
You just are. Like there's nothing. It is what it is. Like. Low 200 hitter. I don't know what his OPS plus is or anything, but it's not good. Like I know his on base percentage is below 300. Like, dude, that's
the last thing I want to talk about. A lot of people are getting on Cole Keith for the misplay at first today. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm not mad at Cole Keith. I'm mad at this team. I'm mad at management. I'm mad at AJ Hinch. I've talked about it. Every guest we've had on. Going back to our first show with Blake Snowden, they have effed this guy over in terms of his development. The guy never knows what position he's going to play once the lineups gets posted. He never knows when he's going to get pinched hit late in the game. This kid has not been able to develop and settle in as a major league player from day one. And what makes it so frustrating is they give this guy a long-term contract before he ever had one at bat in the major leagues. And since he stepped foot in the major leagues, he has not had a solidified position, and he is constantly looking over his shoulder to see if he's getting pinched hit. They have screwed up his development from day one.
Yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, that's perfect. I don't have anything else to follow up with because you're 100% correct. And
I don't want to see it happen to these other guys that are coming up.
No,
that's my point. Like what they have this fire sale. They bring these guys up, have a position in your mind of where they're going to play, and let them play that position day in and day out. And
you want McGonigal to be the shortstop. You want How You Lee to be the second baseman, and you want Max Anderson to be your third baseman.
Colt Keith first.
Colt Keith first.
Roll with that for the rest of the year. Dingler, your catcher.
Correct.
Bring up either. Get rid of Jake Rogers. I don't care. Get a base.
He'll be
get a bag of balls for him. There's no need for Jake Rogers on this roster anymore.
He'll be valuable, except when he needs to pitch and to come in and throw when it's
well, what I'm saying is bring up Lorenzo.
Yeah.
And if Brasino gets healthy and starts raking, you can bring him up. And then you can platoon because they're both left-handed, whichever one you want to go with. But you can have a platoon with Dingler and let's say it's Lorenzo that comes up. Now you can platoon, you can put Dingler at DH. You can do some different things. When you have both your catchers as right-hander, it kind of limits you a little bit. There's no need for Jake Rogers to be on this team going forward. Bring these guys up, solidify positions for them, and let's roll with these young guys and see what we got going into next season. And that's where we're at, Brian. It sucks to say, but it's fire sale time now. And we got to start looking at trades and what the prospects are and all that stuff.
Yep, I've said it for a while. And by the way, I mentioned this to you. The most difficult part of today for me is to watch Isaac Paredes basically win the last two games.
Yep.
Former Tiger. And I remember clear as day when the Tigers traded him for Austin Meadows. And I remember when the Tigers acquired him from the Cubs. And I think it was Avila was sent to the Cubs and Isaac Paredes was a Class A dude.
So, yeah.
Remember? And I'm like, oh, man, he's got some potential. We'll see how it goes. And hadn't broken through yet, but he was still young, and we trade him to Tampa, and he goes off, and then he's an all-star, and then he's doing this test today. It just added to the misery today, right? Just the gut punch, just to watch that, like, and to see where the Tigers are, and that dude should be our everyday third baseman right now, and he's not. And thanks, Alavila, on that one.
One more thing, because I was thinking about this as well. We had Tony Paul on before the season, and we brought up Kenley Jansen, and he was really fearful that the wheels could fall off and we could be seeing a Joe Nathan situation. And that is exactly what we've seen. The wheels have fallen off. He's constantly injured. When he's not injured, he's blowing games. It's an awful. It turned out to be an awful signing, and frustrating, man. Frustrating, because then you look at Justin Verlander, and as much as we loved, kind of from a heartfelt moment and a nostalgia moment, signing Justin Verlander, you really look at it from the outside looking in. Cobb and Verlander, $26 million combined the last 2 seasons. They combined for one start. One start, and that falls on Scott Harris. Terrible signings.
So, by the way, I think right around the trade deadline, Dan, probably I'm hoping the episode after the trade deadline, we talk about the Tigers roster going forward and what we think, who the mainstays are going to be long term, and who won't be around. But looking at the current roster right now, I used to do this with the Lions. Where, besides the pitching staff that we talked about as a strength of the starting pitching is a strength of their team, who are guys that you would say are in the top 5 at their position?
McGonigal and Dingler.
And beyond that, you've got guys that aren't even remotely close. Maybe Riley Green, right? But you've got guys that aren't even remotely close. You could argue the top 20 at their position.
Yeah.
And I remember doing that with the Lions before the Brad Holmes era. So as much as criticism, now he's starting to get a little bit like, they didn't have Jahmyr Gibbs. They didn't have Aiden Hutchinson, right? Penei Sewell. They didn't have that. It's the same thing with the Tigers right now. Like, besides those guys, they're like bottom of the barrel guys that probably wouldn't start for any other team. A lot of guys.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But there are at least a couple. They could have none. They at least have a couple.
I mean, there are teams that have none,
potentially what should be your catcher and your shortstop, and the next guy to come up, the most highly rated prospect that you have, could be your center fielder. And that's how you kind of build a baseball team, right? Is your catcher, your shortstop, and your center fielder, up the middle. So you do have at least some building blocks there. But man, oh man, Brian, that what we thought this season was going to be, and the high hopes that we had coming off 2 playoff years, and the signings they made, and man, for it to turn out like this and to be talking like this before July is and especially when you look at the American League, there's only 4 teams that are above 500.
And the Tigers are still half a game out of the worst record in the American League.
Yeah. Yeah. With as bad as the American League is, as historically bad the American League is, the Tigers are so bad that they're not even in the conversation, and we're talking fire sale.
No.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Well, Brian, any final thoughts before we jump off here?
No, I wish no. I mean, it was good. It was good talking to Anthony about happier times, and we are getting closer to the football season, and there's a lot to look forward to there. But no, Dan, I'm good. We're good.
Hate to end it on a note like that with these Tigers, but that's what they did, man. These Tigers are just so disappointing this year and this week after looks promising with 4 straight wins to start the homestand, lose 5 of their last 6, and it's looking like we're nearing the end, and we're going to start talking trades and all that stuff, and we'll have to get Roger Castillo on to talk about prospects with other teams and things like that, because we're going to start looking at prospects with the Yankees and Dodgers and Brewers and the teams that are really competitive this year. So, but thanks again, Anthony Broome, for joining us from Wolverine.com and On3. Been a huge fan of his work for a really long time. It was a thrill to get to talk to him and get his insight on everything that was going on with Michigan basketball. Obviously a big week with them, with Dusty May leaving to the NBA, and also previewing the Michigan football season a little bit, and talking about Kyle Whittingham and the things that he's done since taking over Michigan football. But that'll do it for tonight. For Brian Barnes, I'm Dan Murphy, and we'll see you again down the road.